Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 288. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're truly excited to have with us the professionally acclaimed illustrator and highly talented creator of Maru Kiru Destroy the Moon, Brendan Albetski.
Thank you very much, Barney. That was a very flattering intro that you gave me. I really appreciate it.
But I did my research, Brendan. It's technically true. See?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Hey, I'll take it. I'm
Yeah.
not going to throw any kind of praise out of bed. So that's really great. I actually I work on another series called The World Ends in Fire with DC Horn, and he wrote another comic that he did with the artist Lane Lloyd, who's someone I'm a huge fan of. And asked me to do a pull quote for it. And he said, would you be comfortable doing something like this? And I said, DC, anything to make people think I'm important. Anything at all,
But so you're here because you're working on volume 2 of Maru Kiru Destroy the Moon. And
Yep.
and this was a COVID project of yours, right?
Yes.
This entire series.
Yes. So this started started ideating on it in late 2019, and then we all got locked up inside, and I suddenly had tons and tons of time to do this work, and I talked with a bunch of people about it, and kind of spun the idea up and got this really cool idea for like a comic that was going to keep me entertained, first and foremost, and something that I decided was worthy of being put out there and shared with everybody else, and we've kind of just been off to the races ever since.
Right.
It's been a blast doing it. I say this all the time, but I say this is a comic. When I'm working on it, if I ever get bored working on the comic, I throw out whatever I'm doing and I move to something that excites me, because I think that if I can't stay excited while I'm working on it, then I can't expect anybody to be excited to read it. So I always say that this is just the good parts comic. Everything that's in this comic is something that I was really thrilled to work on and excited to put out there. So
tell us a little bit of the synopsis. Basically, it's this warrior woman who's here to basically destroy the denizens of the moon.
Yes. So the simple elevator pitch is all in the title. It's she wants to destroy the moon. She's a sword wielding barbarian warrior, and her only goal in life is to destroy the actual celestial body that is the moon. To drill down into it a little bit more, there's a god that lives on the moon and controls all of the magical energies on the planet Tolth. And his high wizard priest, Manotatus, who's the guy with the big cape and the horns, is in charge of this cult of the moon that rules over the world, and is actually considered to be benevolent by a lot of people. They're well loved by the populace, which is something that Maru Kiru can't quite get her head around, and her friend Yaga keeps having to remind her that they're actually embraced by most people. As being, the sole source of magic on the planet. And so they control everything, and they get to decide who gets what and who has this and that. But she, as you kind of come to, you don't find out right away why she wants to get this vengeance on the cult. But we explore that throughout the first volume, and then really in the second volume, which you can read some of these chapters on Global Comics right now.
Right.
And then, of course, when the book comes out, you'll be able to read them all. But the second volume really starts to dive into a little bit more of the history that she has with the cult, and what her basic problem is with the moon in general, and why she wants to really get in there and mess things up.
Because you said in a previous interview that you kind of wrote this because you're your biggest fan and biggest critic of your work.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as you're putting this together, at what point did you start telling a story that you wanted to read, or was there any point where it actually pivoted to, this is a story I want to tell for other people to read?
The story that exists in print is actually the third attempt at writing out a story for this. So
Okay.
I came up with these characters, with the Maru Kiru character and Manotatus, the primary antagonist, and I put them in a couple of situations together, and I actually drew out almost full chapters of the comic a couple of times, and each time it was I had fun working on them to a point, and then I kind of reached a point in the process where it just didn't really click with me, and I didn't really want to show it to anybody else. And so I put it aside, and I said, well, we'll try again later. And when I eventually did finish the first chapter, chapter 1, that was the point where I said, okay, yeah, this is the one. This is the one that I want to put out there. And I think the point that I decided that is actually that big 2-page spread in chapter 1 where they clash for the first time. And that one, yeah. And that specifically the line "unfortunate" just resonated with me in such a way that it was like, this is great, because the comic is not, it's not an out and out comedy. There is some humor in it, and I think that a lot of that comes from just the bombastic way that the characters present themselves.
Right.
It's kind of a ridiculous rule of cool sort of thing. And there is one chapter, specifically the interlude chapter, where I think we play with the humor a little bit more than usual. But for the most part, I just wanted a really big, super energetic, swashbuckling adventure, a la Conan the Barbarian. And I think one of the key tenets of that is the characters have to take themselves ultra seriously. And so there is humor to be found in that, and I definitely think it's entertaining. But they are definitely, these two specifically, Maru Kiru and Manitatis, are both like, Manitatis is definitely over the top bombastic, but definitely very full of himself, prideful, and takes himself extremely seriously. And of course, Maru Kiru, who is on the page more often than not, is kind of self-evidently very self-serious. So, but they're always just yelling at each other, and I think it's fantastic. So
would this be considered an all ages comic, or is there what's the audience for this?
Well, I was actually talking about this the other day, and I'm trying to figure this out, because I think there are a lot of things about it that kind of lend itself to more of an all ages audience. There's no kind of, I keep the language very affected and high fantasy,
Right.
so people aren't cursing at each other or anything like that. There is a lot of violence in it, but the style is kind of cartoony. We have a lot of instances like with the machine people where when she's bashing them up, they kind of just fall into bits, and robot parts like you would do on like a GI Joe cartoon or the TMNT cartoon. I think that they
Right. Yeah,
fought a
the
lot of
original one
robots.
that they're robots, the foot soldiers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But there's also a lot of blood and guts later on. People getting their heads cut off and run through with swords and so on and so forth. It's very stylized, and it's very cartoonish, but it is still happening. So.
Mm.
I would say probably, I don't know, 14s, 15s maybe would be the age range I'd be thinking about. And that's not necessarily what I set out to do, but that's like thinking about who I would hand it to if I had to give it to, because I have my cousins have kids that are around this age, and would I show them the comic? Yeah, I think I probably would. The other comic that I think about a lot is Christine Larson's Orcs, which is
Right.
definitely an all ages book, and that's geared probably towards that same age group. And I think that in terms of the violence in that's probably a notch down from what I do in terms of the kind of the graphic nature of the violence. But I still think that it's not particularly bad in terms of who you could show it to, as long as you're not concerned about your kid grabbing a sword and trying to actually cut your head off. Then if they can be influenced to do that by the comic, then maybe don't show it to them. But I think that for the most part, I read a lot of fantasy when I was a kid, and I was way into it, when I was probably 12 and up.
Mm.
And I was reading like Wheel of Time and Lord of the Rings, obviously, and a lot of other books of that nature, where there's some pretty graphic violence in those things, people getting dismembered and whatnot. So I think
Right.
it's kids can handle a lot, especially with this kind of stuff. So I wouldn't be too worried about giving this to a 12, 13-year-old.
Yeah, it's almost like it's like an in between title between reading like a DuckTales comic, but you're too old for that, but you're also too young to read like heavy metal comics. Like this is like
Yeah.
that good in between, as you said, like the young adult level of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And, I didn't exactly set out to do that, but it's my style is definitely kind of, in that groove where it kind of fits well with that, sort of demographic. So yeah, there's just certain points where there's some themes, like, there's one chapter that where there are cannibals who are eating people. And so, like, there's stuff like that where it makes me go like, maybe not for the kids, but by the same token, you don't actually see them eat people. So they just talk about it.
Right. And so I want to talk a little bit about your coloring, like your palette, but also I
Sure.
want to mention as well that you also talked about previously that you were asked to make a coloring book as well.
Yeah. Yep. That's right. Not for this comic, but for The World Ends in
Right.
Fire.
Yeah.
That project originally started as, DC Horn and I have been in contact for a long time now, and I did a couple covers for his other comic, Once Upon a Time in Xanatopia. And so we had been talking just, as comics friends for a while. And there was one day where his kids wanted something to color. So he printed off something that I had done. I think a draft of one of the covers I had given him. He printed off for his kids to color because I hadn't colored it yet. And he said, what would be really cool is if we did an entire comic that was a coloring book. And I said, yeah, that's a really cool idea. I'm way into it. And it's a fantasy comic, which is my bread and butter. So that was another thing that made me want to do it. And we did the whole thing. And we got to the whole point where we did all the line art. And I turned it into him and I said, okay, what's next? And he says, I'm thinking maybe we should color it. And I said, well, you're the guy writing the checks. So if that's what you want to do, that's what we can do. And we ended up turning it into a full-fledged, fully colored comic. And we're going to do 5 of them now. So, it just took off. We fell in love with the characters that we created and the world that they lived in. So we decided to go full force on that. But that project did start out as a coloring book. And you can still get the coloring book. If you see DC at any kind of con or show. He lives in the South. So, if you he was at I think, Comic-Con in Raleigh recently, South Carolina. He was there and selling coloring books and whatnot. So you can get the full color comic too, but the coloring book is also, it's fun. I have a couple copies of it. I'm afraid to color them, ironically.
Well, because your style kind of lends to the idea of coloring, because of your thick lines. Were you surprised by that? Was that the first time you heard somebody mention, hey, you should make a coloring book?
I actually applied for a job making coloring books a couple of years ago before I started Maru Kiru. I didn't get it, which is a shame. But that was something that I said, yeah, I could definitely do that, because I use really bold lines,
right?
And it does kind of lend itself pretty naturally to a coloring book. And the other thing is because the way I tone. I'm a digital artist, and I've done some traditional stuff, and I used to do a lot of pencil stuff. But for the most part, I've been exclusively digital, working on Maru Kiru especially. So when I do toning, I don't really do it like a traditional inker does. I do it on I'll do a couple of gray layers, and I'll do block, like block colors. But in grays, and then when I do the rest of the coloring, I'll actually take those tone layers and I will change them to be a color. So like this Tomb Accuser of the Undying panel you've got here in the middle. When I initially drew that panel in black and white, all the orange and the red that you see was all black and gray.
Okay.
And when I was doing the actual coloring of it, I like to do colored shadows. So I changed those layers to be colored, and I think it provides a really cool effect. I think it's really unique and a really fun way to present it. I think that there's several schools of thought on like how you should ink, and I feel like I'm probably not like a true inker's inker. I'll mention Christine Larson again just because I'm a big fan, and she's an extremely exceptional inker, and she does some fantastic ink tutorials. So I can like see like the techniques that a lot of these traditional inkers do, and they're really very cool. But I do everything digital, and I could mimic what a traditional artist does, but there's really no reason for me to do that other than if I wanted to reproduce the effect. And I've been working the way that I have long enough that I've kind of become attached to it. So
right. So talk a little bit about the world building aspect of this. How did you were you creating this as since beginning of chapter 1 you knew all the characters and all the worlds and all the cultures, or did this kind of evolve as you were telling the story?
A lot of a lot of what you see, kind of existed beforehand in terms of the world. The name of the world, Tolth, is something that I've had for a long time. The name of this
Mm,
city, Tanaris, is something that I've had for a long time. The names of some of the characters, the name Manotatus is something that I've had scribbled in a notebook since I was like 18.
mm,
So I've held on to that one for a long time. Um, but in terms of what actually the specifics of it, a lot of that develops as the story is going along. So Maru Kiru wasn't originally her name. That was kind of a late stage change that I became enamored with, and I won't even tell you what she was called before because it's not worth it. um, and there's characters like Yaga, who's always been called Yaga, but I don't think she's ever actually been referred to by name in the comic yet.
oh wow.
And it's gotten to the point where I think I might just try to keep that going as a joke. And there are a couple other characters who have yet to be named. The woman with the spectacles there is a character who's taking a larger role in comics coming up, and she has a name, but it hasn't been revealed yet in the comic. And then of course, Juval down at the bottom of the page here, she gets named in the comic. She's probably the first real antagonist that we face in the comic. Manotatus, I don't really count him because he's the overall arch villain. He's always a threat. But
Okay.
in terms
Yeah.
of like who's the first person we're gonna fight, Juval and Salmo are the first arc of the comic is kind of all leading up to them fighting, which actually kind of
Wait,
concludes chapter 9. So
that's cool. And do you actually have a an end game to this? Is this an ongoing series? But I believe that you mentioned that you do have this is a finite series that will
yes, it
culminate.
will end. It will come
Yeah.
to an end. I'm kind of toying with the idea of doing 5 volumes. We'll see how well the story lends itself to that length. I have kind of figured out what I want to do through the end of volume 3 right now. Again, the specifics change as I work on the page, but the general outline kind of remains the same. Um, I think about this a lot, like the way that I do when I'm playing like D&D, and you have a very very strong idea of where you want the story to go through thematically,
Right.
and how you want to push the characters in that direction. But they're going to make their own decisions along the way in some cases, and you need to be able to adjust for that, and to let them tell the story that they want to tell. um, I was thinking about this a lot as I'm kind of moving out of the first arc and into the second arc. Maru Kiru being a very straightforward character, a very brute force character,
Right.
who always solves her problems by charging them head on and facing them with as much overwhelming force as possible. So now I'm thinking about the idea of like, well, that's not something that's always going to be able to work for her. That she's going to run into a situation where that's not going to be the way out, and how's she going to deal with that. So that's where we're kind of headed thematically now, and we'll figure out the specifics of it as I go. I try not to bog myself down too far in what needs to happen, because I find that pretty draining creatively. And I've mentioned previously about how if I get bored working on something, I'll throw it out and I'll do a new idea. And so I try to be very loose with the way that I map my story arcs, because there's a chance that something I think is a fantastic idea is just not going to pan out,
Right.
and I'm going to need to change it. So I don't really write scripts for this comic.
Okay.
I start with the thumbnails. I start with the pictures. My friend Zach calls it the one man Marvel method. So I draw all the pages first, and then I will do the dialogue afterwards. So I usually will start with like maybe an outline on a scrap of paper that just says, page 1, this happens, page 2, this happens, page 3, 4, 5, 6, they fight, page 7, this happens, and then I'll go and do the thumbnails, and then I'll do the rough out the pages, and then I'll maybe start thinking about what the specifics of the dialogue will be. But the actual dialogue, I don't actually write it until the lettering stage for the most part.
Really? Wow.
Yeah,
Okay. All right.
Well, I don't do a whole lot of dialogue, as you may have noticed.
Right.
So it's not that much of a risk. It's not something I'd recommend for everybody, especially if you have characters that like to talk. You should plan out your dialogue a little bit more than that. Actually, this chapter here was Salmo, who's probably the most verbose character that the comic has had. And that was kind of his shtick, was that he was, his kind of obnoxious, very full of himself champion character. He talks in third person, and he's he pontificates about his various religious beliefs and how he believes he's chosen the moon god and can't be defeated and can't be killed. And yeah, here's a page that where I had to figure out the dialogue on this before I drew the page, because there was a lot of words that had to go
Right.
on there.
Right. So talk to us a little bit about the palette that you use. It's one of the
Sure.
most engaging pieces we see in any other comics. Is that there is a level of explicit vibrantness
Mm-hmm.
to the pages.
Yeah, so I only use three colors, and I'll mix them. I'll do like a 50% tone of one over another to, mix
Wow.
blue and yellow to get green. Um, and sometimes I'll add in a little bit of a neon to pop it for the RGB. But for the most part, I work with the CMYK,
Right.
the cyan, magenta, yellow, and I just use those three. And I will mix them on the page as I'm going to blend and make everything work right. I turn everything up. I turn saturation all the way up all the time. And that's another thing where that's something a lot of people don't do. And the reason they don't do that is because it can be very difficult to guide the eye through the page when everything is fully saturated. Um, and playing with depth is difficult when you do completely saturated colors. And so what I tend to do is I'll use opposing colors, complementary colors, to guide a page as opposed to saturation. So like this page got the crowd in the background with the oranges and the reds and that kind of warm tones, and then Juval in the front, very cool colors, the blue and the purple, and the kind of the neon moon blue, which I don't really use anymore because it doesn't print super well. I
Right.
changed the color of the moon to be more of a green because that prints better. Um, but so yeah, that's how I pull focus, is I use the palette to do that instead of saturation. And one thing I do is use a lot of highlights,
Mm.
and I usually try to build to a bright white as being the most forward focused thing. I will put a black filter over a page when I finish it, and I work in Clip Studio Pro, and if you put a black layer and you change the layer settings to saturation, it'll only show you the saturation of your tones. So if I do that and I can still read the page with the highlights that I do, then I know that I have effectively created a well colored page. So
Huh.
I do that with most pages that I do to make sure that they're still readable, because it can be easy to lose control of the focus when you're using such heavy saturation. But this is another one of those things where it's like it's become my thing now, and I like it that way. So I'm gonna definitely keep doing it.
And plus, you also are adding into some of your fonts, especially some of your action fonts, to really stand out to add to the action as well. Was this something that you grew into as the story progressed, or is this how would you compare chapter 1 to say chapter 9, art and storytelling style?
In terms of, I would say that it's kind of the evolved version of what I started in chapter one. I definitely
Mm,
think I've gotten better at it as I've gone. Um, and I learn new tricks by doing. But art style is in many ways is really just the way that you're solving problems on the page.
right.
And so I've gotten better at that as I've worked on this comic, just from the act of doing it. So still using all those same kind of thematic elements, and the strong focus on the kinetic energy and maintaining energy, and really just kind of hitting punch and really strong action, and really strong flow of action, and just kind of ratcheting that up bit by bit every chapter. Every time I make a chapter, I want it to be the best thing I've ever done. So I think I've managed to do that pretty much every time now, and I'm really proud of that. And I want to keep doing it, because it's like it feels like I'm getting better as a creator as I'm working on it. But everything still, I think, jives together. You look at the first page of the comic and the most recent page of the comic, you can see that there's been a little bit of evolution of style, a little bit of improvement from me as an artist, and that's just bound to happen. But I still think that they jive well together, and I'm still happy to show off the early chapters to people. I'm not embarrassed by anything that I've done back there, and I think that's a good sign, because I definitely have old comics that I said I don't want anybody to see these ever, because I just don't think that they represent what I'm capable of now. Whereas with Maru Kiru, I think that you look at the whole thing as a whole, and I think that it still is even in the early chapters, a very good encapsulation of what I've always wanted to do with this, and part of what's kept it going so strong is that I think I've really finally fallen into a groove with what I want to do and what I want to make. With the dialogue, especially because you brought it up, I play more now with words that don't have dialogue bubbles.
Right.
Getting wrapping the dialogue bubbles really tightly for the shouted lines is something that I still do, but trying to get away from necessarily the traditional dialogue bubbles and do something a little bit a little bit funky. For like the regular dialogue people have, I try to obey the rules for the most part. Even some of these here, like these bubbles are a little bit small. If I was to go back and do this again, I think I'd give them a little bit more breathing room, a little bit more margin. But they're not bad.
Right.
They're shaped well, and they work. They just maybe could use a little bit more room to breathe. But again, it's just like you learn these things as you're working on it and as you're going through. And if you went back to I do know people that go back and they will redraw early chapters of their comic, and I'm like, I haven't got time for that. If you every time you learn something new, you went back and you redid your entire body of work so that it matched, you never get anything done. So
Right. Yeah.
yeah, you just gotta you gotta be proud of the progress that you've made, and but still acknowledge that the things you made couple of years ago, they're still good, and they still work. I think that it's fine to have a little bit of evolution and a little bit of change in your style, as long as it still kind of works as a cohesive whole.
Right. And because, as you mentioned, you're working with on Global Comics, and earlier you mentioned that you love their customer service, and that's one of the
it's they've gotten a lot bigger since I started working with them, and they've got a lot more larger publisher deals. There's still room for the indie people on there. I feel like maybe not as much as there once was, but that's bound to happen. I think it's a good place to. It's currently still the best option for people who want to host their comics online. I do believe that. There's been a lot of questionable business practices that have been revealed at some of the other platforms. Webtoon specifically, that's the one that I'm not afraid to name and shame that, because I feel like they've really done some pretty shady stuff for the past couple of years. And I feel like I'm not on Webtoon anymore. I took all of my things off of Webtoon, and I have no intention of going back. And Global Comics, I think, has really been doing a good job of kind of remaining transparent, remaining above board, and being accessible. Because I haven't talked to them in a bit, but I know who to reach out to if I wanted to talk to somebody, and I'm pretty sure they would answer my email. So yeah, I think that they're still they're still doing the best job of anybody out there in the biz, and they're only getting bigger. So it's definitely it's a good service to be on.
right. And so because they can actually, you can go to Global Comics and pay 99 cents to download one of your issues.
Yes, yep. I think you can do that with most of them, actually.
Right.
And I don't, not a lot of people do that. Most people, if they
Right.
want to buy the comic, they buy the book.
Right.
And I do see most when you hit that download, I do see most of that money, which is pretty good, because a lot of services, they'll take a big chunk.
Right.
But I do see most of that that download, which is great. And I'm actually going to be on. I'm going to be on Kindle soon. My publisher, Castaigne Publishing, is working out the details with Amazon right now to get all of their books onto Amazon and onto Kindle. So I will be interested to see how that goes. The thing I'm most excited about there is that we'll finally be able to have international shipping for the book. So I have a lot of fans in the UK who have not been able
Mm,
to get a copy of the book. And, I've kind of felt bad about that, but there's not a whole lot I can do when it costs $30 to ship a $20 book overseas. It's just insane. So I am looking forward to that, to Amazon making it a little bit more accessible to get the book if you're not living in the US,
right.
because it has been difficult.
Do you know what the percentages that Global Comics it takes on a 99-cent download?
I don't recall exactly. If I had to wager a guess, I think I got like 76 cents on the 99, which is pretty
Okay.
good.
Yeah.
I've definitely seen worse.
Yeah. For those that are now fans of your work, Brandon, you actually there's a few Kickstarters that you're part of. There's a few other projects that you've been
Yep.
working on as well.
Yeah. Kickstarters that I'm a part of, I've never done a Kickstarter for Maru Kiru, and
Right.
because I have a publishing deal for it, I've never needed to. Um, and I've been kind of cool with that because I'm a guy who, and it's I set this interview up with through Cody, and Cody's been working on PR for me for the past couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And something I said to him and something he's been helping me with, and something that I think is fantastic is I'm the guy. I want to sit here and I want to draw the book, and I want somebody else to do everything else. So I have Castaigne to help me with the actual printing of it, and they do a fantastic job. Those guys have been great to work with, and I've got for the Kickstarters that I'm a part of, and I definitely will throw my weight behind those projects. I don't sign on for jobs that I don't think are worth doing.
Right.
And so like World Ends in Fire is a fantastic book. You should definitely check it out. There's no chance to back it at the moment because the Kickstarter is over, but there will be more Kickstarters for that one. Insomniac's Delights with Alice Quinn Rose. That's an
Right.
excellent anthology. Um, she originally did that as a 7-story anthology on Kickstarter. Did not manage to make the campaign, unfortunately. But she didn't give up and retooled the whole thing, and now it's coming out as a series of 2-story issues. So each issue will
Okay.
have 2 stories and have a series of Kickstarters and set those with a lower goal. And the first one of those did manage to fund successfully. So very excited about that. I have a story in that's really experimental. It's a no dialogue story where the main character is a dog, and the story is primarily told through smell. So that's a really interesting comic. It's called Who's a Good Boy, and it's kind of creepy. It's a horror comic, so I
Right.
hope
Yeah. I
people will
remember
enjoy
you
it.
said. Yeah.
And then Fractured Realms with Limit Break Comics. I did a story with a writer named Alex Garrick Wright, who wrote a story called The Doom That Came to Midgard. If you
Mm.
haven't heard of Fractured Realms, it's the Limit Break Comics Norse horror anthology. So it's modern horror, but all themed around Norse mythology. So the
Wow.
settings are all
Okay.
modern, but all of the themes tie back to Norse mythology. Ours is about Ragnarok. And
Right.
that was another one that was extremely cool to work on, and I think people are really going to enjoy that. So that's another great Kickstarter that did manage to fund. But yeah, if you see my name attached to a Kickstarter, I wholeheartedly endorse what's going on. Like I said, I wouldn't put my name on it if I didn't think it was great. So
Right. Volume 2 of Maru Kiru Destroy the Moon is coming out. As of this recording, is coming out imminently.
I'm probably a couple of months.
Okay.
So I have to finish writing it, which is the big thing. But I would expect to see it in probably early 2024.
Okay.
That would be my best guess. So the volume 1 is going to be turning 1 in 2 days as of this recording.
Wow. Okay. All
On
right.
July 29th. That's this book's birthday, so I'm very excited about that. And really just huge thanks to the people at Castaigne for rolling the dice on this, and I think we've all been pretty happy with how it did, and we're really excited to do another one. So I've done a bunch of work. You scroll down a little bit on the Castaigne page here, you see the cover for Base Tape Massacre. That's all my art as well. So that's a fully illustrated novel, and I did 10 illustrations for that as in addition to the cover. We're gonna be doing another
Wow.
one of
Okay.
those pretty soon. So that was a lot of fun. That's more horror. I'm finding myself put into a lot of horror, which is great because I'm a huge horror fan. It's not what I ever saw myself doing in comics. I always thought I was going to do exclusively fantasy comics, but I found myself in some situations where I'm doing sci-fi, I'm doing horror, it's really cool, and I'm excited about it. But yeah, but in terms of Maru Kiru, I'm finishing up this chapter 10, and then I got one more chapter, which is going to be another interlude chapter that I'm going to write after that. That'll be done by November, and then it's just me getting with the fine folks at Castaigne about the particulars of getting that second volume out. And we're also going to be working on a second printing of the first volume. There's
Nice.
still copies available of the first printing, but we have decided that for the second printing, we're going to do a different cover. Okay. So if you want to get this cover, which is one of my favorite things that I've ever drawn, and I have it hanging on my wall, and I have it behind me. It's a beautiful wraparound cover. If you want this one, you better act quickly because there aren't many of them left, and we won't be making more of them. So now is the time to order that. It's $20, and then I believe it's $5 shipping from Castaigne, so that's $25 in total. Of course, if you manage to see me in person, you don't have to pay shipping. I still have several copies that I'm selling. So, but yeah, they're going fast. Right. There's not many left.
So Brandon, if people want to learn more about you and your book, where's the best place they could go to?
You should definitely glue yourself to my website, brendanalbetski.com. And there I have it's not where I'm the most active in terms of news, but it is the most stable place to find me. We're living in a bit of a tumultuous period for social media, so I can't really commit to saying, follow me on Twitter because we don't even know if that's what that website is called anymore. But I have a link tree on my website, which has all of my social links. Very active on Instagram. Cody's got me on TikTok now. If you want to see time-lapse drawings, that's not on the link tree yet. I got to put that on there, but check me out on TikTok if you want to see my time lapses. This is the page where I'm going to have every, my master list of all the places to find me. And of course, you can always email me, htbcomics@gmail.com. If you're a writer or a publisher who's looking for a very unique and powerful artist, feel free to contact me. Couple of things that I'm working on right now that I'm very excited about. I'm working on a card game at the moment.
Oh, fun.
Which is a card game that is designed to kind of mimic, a fighting game like Street Fighter or something of that nature. So I get to design 10 different characters for that, which is something I'm extremely excited about. We've talked a little bit about who's going to be in it, and we've got some fun archetypes we're going to play with and some kind of wacky twists on that. Throwing robots and aliens into it because that's ends up in everything that I do. But that's something that's going to be awesome and probably will end up on Kickstarter in the near future. Of course, World Ends in Fire. I just finished a second issue for that. You'll see a Kickstarter for that at some point. And then, cooking up some fun things with some of my other comics buddies. Obviously, I'm going to be still working on Maru Kiru Destroy the Moon, but I'm also maybe going to be appearing somewhere in Evan DeCastro's Lost Between Worlds. I don't know. Keep your ears tuned for that. And of course, tons of stuff that I'm doing with DC. In addition to World Ends in Fire, I can't even begin to tell you all the things we got going on there. So yeah, always have plenty of things to talk about, and I can just string them along forever. So,
well, I gotta say that I would venture to guess that your readers that read Maru Kiru Destroy the Moon will be very upset with you if at the end of the series she does not end up destroying the moon.
Well, I mean, it's called Maru Kiru Destroy the Moon. There's really only one of two ways that the story could end. It's either going to be a happy ending or it's going to be a tragic one. And, we don't know. We don't know. You're going to have to read the comic.
I know, see?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Brendan. It was great chatting with you.
Yeah, it was wonderful chatting with you as well. And I really appreciate you having me on.
I can tell you right now what Albetski means. I just typed it in.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. The meaning is investigator.
Oh, man, that's pretty cool. I'll take that. Cool? Yeah. Not bad.
Albetski. That's pretty cool. Yeah. Meeting phone. See, there you go. So there you go. See, we're just I'm helping you out, Brandon.
Figuring stuff out. Yeah, I learned something about myself today. That's pretty cool.
And don't we hope that every day we learn something more about ourselves?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good goal.
All right, let me do the intro.
Sure.